Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on your lunch hour today to talk a little bit about our MSU Global Scholar presentation of Swimming from Great Lakes to Great Seas. My name is Lauren Juskovich, and I'm an extension educator with Michigan State University Extension and Michigan Sea Grant. And I'm joined today with my colleague, Elliot Nelson, who is also my counterpart, but on the other side of the Upper Peninsula. The MSU Global Scholar Program is designed in the College of Ag and Natural Resources, for creating and supporting collaborative partnerships on an international basis. And so we were awarded as cohorts as part of this past year and chose to develop partnerships in Indonesia. And so today, a quick overview of what we're going to talk about in the next hour. Well, we're going to talk about aquaculture and really what that is, why we picked Indonesia, and then more specifics of our time there in terms of the Blue Economy Conference that we attended, types of systems, species, and end uses of products that we saw, the markets, the processing types, really cool restaurants and food, and of course, our 360 virtual reality endeavors and our lessons learned. And so this is just a heads up, this is very picture heavy, but we're hoping that it's more story-like-esque. And so let's begin. So for those of you joining, not sure how much intro you've had to aquaculture. So just kind of want to start out with that aquaculture is also called fish farming or fish culture. It's really the rearing of aquatic species using human activities to enhance growth. So whether that is for stocking, conservation efforts, or for food, or bait, feed fishing, and even ornamentals. So those fish that we could see in Petco, we'll find out a lot more in today's presentation of where they come from. But this graph specifically shows FAO's World Captured Fisheries and Aquaculture Production. It's typically one of my go-to graphs when I'm talking about why aquaculture. This kind of shows on the x-axis down here that since the 1980s, the world's wild harvest or commercial fishing has really been stagnant in terms of leveling off. We don't want to overfish. That's the carrying capacity of our oceans. However, the human population is exponentially increasing, and so we still need to be able to feed the world, and seafood is a great option, protein option that can be very sustainable. And so to fill that gap, aquaculture has increased dramatically over the last 30 years or so, and right now is about 50-50 in terms of if your seafood at the store is either coming from wild harvest or farm raised. And so where's the US on this scale? Well, US, if you want to give it a number, it's 18th. And so we produce very little in the scheme of aquaculture. And we also eat very little in terms of how much seafood we consume. Indonesia is second to only China in terms of production for their aquaculture, and they consume a lot more fish. And another statistic to make it relative is that seafood is actually the US's second largest trade deficit at $14 billion, right after oil. And so there's a pretty big gap here, and we were hoping to work with Indonesia and partners that I've worked with in the past to kind of continue that conversation and help bridge that gap in terms of teaching and learning from each other.
Thanks, Lauren. That was a great intro to Indonesia. It's an incredible country, and we're going to do a little zoom through where we went. So if you don't know Indonesia, it's squeezed right between Australia and Asia. It's a huge country. It was one of the largest populations of any country in the world. It's made up of 17,000 islands or so. But we were mainly housed right here in the city of Jakarta on the island of Java. This is the Polytechnic AUP. It's a trade school where the conference happened, where Rami is housed, who was kind of our guide around Jakarta. He really helped set up all the connections. And so we spent quite a few days there, but then we traveled down to Bogor, which is just south of Jakarta on the island of Java. And there we got to visit a number of places like Bogorian Aquatics and Jasmine Aquatics, ornamental fish farms, and as well as the markets, which we'll talk about later, for those ornamental fish, which was really just an amazing, incredible experience. So Bogor, a couple hours south. We spent about 3 or 4 days there. And then after Bogor, we spent a couple days in Sarang. This was commuting from Jakarta. Sarang is just a little bit west of Jakarta, and we were up at the another campus of Polytechnic AUP with one of their faculty members there who got to show us around their campus. We got to meet a lot of their students. We also got to spend a day talking to regulators, a second day there at one of their smaller fish markets. So that was our kind of time on the island of Java. So over 10 days we spent there. Really amazing experience. This is where the majority of the population in Indonesia is. This is like really where Indonesians mainly live, even though it's a huge country. But we did get to spend some time at the end in the kind of more tropical paradise style Indonesia. This is Lombok Island right next to Bali, where most Americans go to visit. We did get to stay on a beautiful beach while we were there, which was really nice after a couple weeks in the city. Our guide Bayu was with the Ministry of Fisheries there, where we got to tour their facility, which was just massive and amazing, as well as learn all about the lobster industry down in kind of the bottom right there, the south east of the island, and we got to tour that whole peninsula. So a really amazing time there. We were all over the place, and we're going to dive now a little bit deeper into some of those experiences. So hopefully you can learn a little bit like we did.
Thanks, Elliot. Great overview. And so let's talk a little more in depth of our stories. I guess for our first day there, arriving at midnight, 1 a.m. and having to present at 8 a.m. Was a lot of fun. But we attended their National Blue Economy Conference, where I was invited to be a keynote speaker, where I shared projects about aquaculture and our work here in Michigan, such as the Great Lakes Fresh Fish Finder, and how our outreach and education efforts kind of pursued over the last 2 years or so. And so as these conferences go, I shared a stage with 5 other professionals, including the Director General of Aquaculture in Indonesia and the Chairman of the Agency of Marine Fisheries Research and Human Resources Agency. And it was a really humbling experience, very exciting, very, very fruitful and rewarding. To also share a little bit more, we were also in the presence of not only the director of the university, but also the Minister of Marine Affairs and Fisheries himself, who attended as well. And you could see that it's not really a state college like MSU, but a federal college, which was a very interesting, unique change. And so their universities were also their military. And so you'll see students dressed up in military uniforms throughout. And so what we also presented a little bit on our 360 work, and excited to kind of dive into what else we explored right after the conference to kind of learn a little bit more about Indonesia.
Yeah, that bottom right picture was a bit of the dances of the country. And again, the country is, 17,000 islands, many, many cultures within Indonesia. And their country slogan is unity in diversity, which they really embrace their diversity there and really appreciate and enhance each other's, unique aspects. And not just people, but also animal diversity. Those are some of the crazy animals we got to see. This is a picture of Lauren in the middle there, standing over that giant water monitor, the second largest lizard after Komodo dragons in the world. We had tons of them at one of the eco-tour places we went. Orangutans, elephants, lion or tigers, all of course in the zoo. But we saw some incredible animal diversity. And if you click the next slide, some of that diversity, and actually the vast majority of it, was really in fish, but the diversity of the mangroves is really is striking. So one of the things we got to do on a day off was go to a mangrove eco village right in the heart of Jakarta. So that middle picture there is standing on top of a 7-story rusty tower, taking pictures of the mangroves there. You can see some of the incredible animal diversity at the bottom there. Blue white-eared kingfisher, the giant water monitor, all pictures we took, all things we saw at the mangroves. Of course, not the tiger that was in the zoo, but mangroves are super diverse, and they used to be all over the place. If you click the next image, this is a picture of one of the largest intact mangrove forests in the world in India. And this is what a lot of the coastline of many tropical places used to look like. River deltas with full of these amazing mosaics of super diverse mangrove forests. But if you click the next slide, what a lot of this has been converted into today is agriculture. And so many shrimp farms and rice paddies kind of were made in these super rich spots, just like our own river deltas here in the US. If you click the next slide, you can see that when we were in Sarang, the whole coastline doesn't look like it used to. It's now all primarily agriculture. And this kind of led us to, if you click the next slide, one of our adventures, which was learning from the folks at Polytechnic AUP in Sarang. So this was another campus outside of Jakarta. And at this technical college, they train students to try to solve that problem of mangroves and agriculture conflict. And the way they do that, they have 2 programs there. They have an aquaculture program. You can click the video, Lauren. And they also have a mangrove culture program. So they grow multiple types of mangroves from seedlings, as well as shrimp from seedlings. So you can see in the left there, the mangroves being cultured. They have multiple species, some great educational signage there, but they also start the shrimp from babies. And these are opportunities to train both students in both areas to learn how to really grow these things from scratch. And the students are the ones doing this stuff. They really have a full production facility for both things. If you click the next slide, the mangrove or the shrimp, once they are grown up here, end up getting put into shrimp ponds. And shrimp ponds are very common all across Indonesia and many tropical areas. But these shrimp ponds are a little unique. They might look dirty, but they're actually biofloc systems where you really grow the food for the shrimp inside there, oxygenating those. Really nice production split up into multi-units there. But what's interesting is normally shrimp ponds were built on mangroves, and the mangroves were destroyed to build shrimp ponds. But they're pioneering a new way of doing it that actually enhances both mangroves and shrimp ponds. If you click the next, what they're particularly doing is using mangrove buffers around their shrimp ponds, actually bringing back mangroves. And these were like 5-year-old mangroves that already, you can see in the very back there, had started growing quite tall. And they grow on the edges. They put a buffer all around their ponds to both help catch nutrient pollution that might come off the pond, as well as to prevent flooding in and out of the ponds. But it also protects the ponds from predators. Predators like those giant water monitors and crabs like to eat shrimp, but they more like to live in mangroves. When their mangroves are destroyed, they live in the ponds and eat the shrimp. But when there's mangroves available, they'd rather stay on those mangroves, and it prevents predation, allowing both mangroves to grow and shrimps to grow more efficiently. If you click the next slide, this was a really, really neat system to see, but it wasn't something that just easily came about. You know, that bottom one picture there on the left is a mangrove or a shrimp pond that was way too big initially. They started with really big ponds. They had die-offs. But thankfully, they're doing good research to really hone in on the best ways to do this type of production. So it takes a lot of intense research and a lot of intense manual labor. That giant net on the top left is a seine net. And the way they get the shrimp out of the pond is to put students into the pond with those nets and faculty and walk them through the pond and collect them. So it's a lot of hard work and hard labor to perfect these kinds of systems. And yes, those ponds are lined with a liner there. You can see that black liner. If you click the next line, So this is a really cool way of producing shrimp and also growing mangroves, but it doesn't just stop there. On the bottom right, they really are targeting zero waste shrimp production. And so you can see those wonton karang. They're a type of shrimp snack that's actually using what typically would be parts of the shrimp that just aren't saved, right? You normally just save that big meaty tail, but these are other parts of the shrimp that actually can be used to make snacks. And so they're really finishing out that life cycle with the shrimp pond. But mangroves, again, normally destroyed by farmers, they are trying to find ways to add value to those mangroves. And so you can see the Ho tea and the picture there, it might be hard to see, but we're holding ice cream that's actually made out of mangroves. So they're making syrups and they're making sugars and flours and just vegetable products out of the mangroves. And these are all student initiatives where they actually sell these things. But what's even more cool is that they sell the shrimp babies to farmers, to local shrimp farmers, providing a need for high quality young shrimp to farmers, but also providing an opportunity to farmers to come and say, look, this is how we're doing farming, and it's actually really productive, and we're saving the mangroves, and those mangroves even have value themselves for additional products. So they're not just doing this cool research in a bubble, they're actively having farmers in and out all the time to be able to kind of pass on that information, to not just keep it at the university, but to make sure it spreads. And beyond that too, to fund this, you can see the children holding up mangroves there in the mangrove planting area that we visited. And this is whole part of their ecotourism development. They fund all of this, and they've actually restored, I think, over 100 hectares of mangrove. They fund it all by having schools and companies come and pay them to plant the mangroves and to learn about the importance of mangroves and how mangroves and shrimp can be grown together. So this was an amazing experience where I think all of us in Extension, we're always looking for those opportunities where universities really embedded in the community and benefiting the community. And this was one of the most powerful examples I think I've ever seen. So a really cool experience in Sarang there. I don't know if you had anything to add on that shrimp mangrove whole setup.
No, that was just awesome. Good job.
It was really fun. Now at their university and across many of the universities, that the polytechnics are kind of like community colleges, technical schools, and all sorts of incredible education programs at the different campuses. One we really thought was impressive. This was again where the mangroves were grown. They also teach how to grow catfish, but also how to grow pompano. And at the bottom, you see their version of a school bus or a university bus, which is the university boat that goes out to the floating classroom. And this is where our guide for that part of the trip does a lot of his teaching out in the middle of the ocean next to a tropical island. It's a pretty cool place, but it is pretty lonely out there. They do send students sometimes who are struggling or need a little extra education to spend a few weeks out there. They do have a little tiny hut where they can cook food and sleep and everything. So it's a very different kind of educational experience, but very hands-on, and you definitely walk away knowing how to run a cage system there.
Awesome. Thanks, Elliot. And, speaking of cages, just kind of want to relate a little bit to our mindsets here in the US. And it's really, I have to think about it as well and reteach myself that, net pens, what's the difference between net pens and cage culture? And so kind of want to explain that as we move forward, as this is pretty two really popular systems used in Indonesia. And net pens are shown here on the left. They are typically staked into the ground, into really shallower waters, sort of like a lake or a pond or the tributaries, and are encompassed by a net on 4 sides in the bottom, but not the top. And so these are more prone for flooding, but they're a lot more manageable to use in terms of an investment, or for, say, the single farmer down here on the bottom left with his raft of bamboos and tires. And cage culture is a little bit different, though. They can use nets, right? So they could be net cages. Instead of a pen that's to hold the fish, it's really just completely caged. So having a top net as well, they're typically much bigger. They are either floating, so similar to these on top, where they're closer to the surface, or they're submerged, such as here where there's buoys to mark and anchor them. But the cage right here where we're standing is basically about 10 by 10 feet that's submerged about 20 feet underwater. And so those a little distinction, but we'll kind of move forward with those two different types of systems as we move forward in this conversation. And, you know, speaking of that big submerged cage, this was probably one of my highlights. It was the Miracle of Lombok. And, you know, when we were in Lombok, we learned everything about lobster aquaculture, which was super awesome and exciting, but really it made a point when we heard that it was the Miracle of Lombok, because these baby shrimp right here shown on the left, very transparent, which was crazy to see and think about and understand that you can identify these two different species by their markings actually on their antenna. But there's millions of them when they spawn that just pop up in this one community in Lombok. And the community kind of took advantage and said, hey, you know, nobody else has access to these baby lobsters, so let's try to figure this out. And so we worked with Bayou, who works as part of the ministry, but then also he's a lobster farmer himself. And so he works very closely with these communities. And we went to go visit one where they used here, and they found that this worked the best in terms of capturing those baby lobster from the wild. They are reusable concrete bags, and they are crimped in a way to look like a fan and then tied onto netting. And so what they do is they go out into the water, they put them in the water, shine light onto them at night, and the lobsters come and kind of stay stuck onto that concrete mesh and are brought up. And then they are held indoors in really in-house hatchery systems. And so this was on the right side. This was one family that we went. They were actually currently constructing their own house based on the income they were receiving from this Miracle of Lombok. They were selling those little transparent babies that are at a much higher value to be exported, but then they also hold on to and have the lobsters molt a few times in their stages before they sell them to local farmers. And so the way they do that is either in concrete tanks or coolers, and it's really interesting to see how these communities kind of move forward with it. And so one of the reasons why they had to you know, capture them from the wild is they haven't found a successful way in terms of breeding or spawning these lobsters. And so the two cultured that they specifically grow will be the pearl lobster and the sand lobster. And Bayou was working on some research and trying to find diets and things that worked best for them. And so in terms of grow out, more commonly we saw them in the cage culture, floating cage culture. As shown here on the right, when those are harvested about a year, depending on the species, a year or two grown out, and then dumped into holding tanks and then packaged and shipped to wherever they're going. But really a lot more research in terms of, okay, what's the best way to do this, how to go about it. If we hold them in a recirculating tank, they start losing color, which isn't going for the high premium target. So how else can we kind of move forward with this? But the end product, I gotta say, is pretty delicious. But on the right here is the pearl lobster. They go for about $50 US each, and that's wholesale. So it's a lot of money when you're looking in those cages that have about 80 lobsters in each cage. And then also looking at the sand lobster, but they also caught really pretty wild ones that might just show up from time to time, like the petite lobster here. And, you know, of course, our taxi ride with our group, kind of working through the different cages here on a boat.
I think interesting that, you know, economically, Indonesia has a really wide span, but a lot of poverty. And we really saw that village around that entire industry that was really quite nice. And because of that miracle of Lombok. So it is a really important economic driver for this island community.
Thanks, Elliot. Yeah, they're, yep. Yep, thank you. A lot more story there, but yeah. So other in terms of diversity though, right? We wanna honor that, and that other cage cultures food species specifically. We also saw where the pompano here on the left, in the middle were barramundi. They were pretty skittish, but hiding in the corners in the shade. And then here on the right, you could see me and Bayou talking over grouper, and these grouper were massive, just huge. And they, when feeding them and they're coming up to the surface, it's very scary on a floating dock. Let me tell you, that was fun.
Bayou told us don't fall in. We probably won't get you back out.
And so other research that we saw Bayou working on, and a few others in the places we traveled, was abalone, where they had the abalone hatchery here right next to the ocean. They harvested and cultured their food as an algae, and kind of grow out using like these half PVC pipes and these flow through tanks as well, kind of providing a happy environment for them. Another interesting one was seaweed. We don't really think a lot of seaweed here in the US, at least I don't. Not one of my favorites, but in terms of Indonesia's aquaculture production, a lot is seaweed. And so a really cool thing when you're moving along the water are these floating rafts of just seaweed. They're really taking advantage over the sunlight and surface area. You can see these ladies, I feel like it's knitting time almost whenever I come into groups of ladies doing seaweed, but they're harvesting off extra seaweed and tying on pieces to regrow. And so it's kind of just continuing with the same seed or so. Then they lay out the lower grade seaweed to dry out on the concrete next to the beach. And then you see it harvested and packaged away, whether by truck, or we actually were introduced to it as a seasoning on our plane ride into Indonesia, where they had roasted seaweed to add to our food. Elliot.
Yeah. So one interesting thing, you know, we saw those spiny lobster. They're different than our U.S. lobster. They don't have the claws. You know, they're really high value, $50 wholesale for one of those lobster, $50 US wholesale. Those abalone are extremely expensive, but they're also hard to grow. A lot of them don't just eat fish flakes, and we'll see ornamental fish in a minute. And you can't just throw goldfish flakes into some of these species if you want high quality product. So they're growing the feed. So this is at that Ministry of Aquaculture facility where Bayou worked, and these three ladies grow a ton of algae. If you hit the next slide, you want to know how you grow algae? Well, you put algae in a tube or a beaker, and you add oxygen and you add light, and you can grow algae, and it grows really fast. In fact, quickly you have to move it from that kind of beaker to a slightly bigger tank and a bucket. And in those buckets, they'll reproduce, and the next day you got to move it to a bigger bucket. You might be going outside now to slightly bigger buckets until finally they reproduce again, and you got to throw them into another bigger bucket where they have giant tanks full of algae, which then they throw into an even bigger bucket full of zooplankton. And this is where they're actually growing a lot of zooplankton to feed some of those larval fish. It's always important to make sure you put the algae in the zooplankton, not the zooplankton in the algae, or you're going to run out of algae. But it was really amazing. I never thought I'd see a giant recirculating aquaculture tank just full of zooplankton. If you click the next one, though, it didn't just stop with these big government facilities. You know, small little companies like Begorian Aquatics are growing Artemia in a water bottle. Everything is very entrepreneurial. It's really amazing to see Artemia, a very small crustacean, that's really an amazing food source growing in a water bottle. You can hit the next slide. And so they're just growing them in those simple, small systems. Also red bloodworms. Again, a lot of these larval fish, they're not going to eat fish flakes. They'll need live food. But you can see Lauren playing with the bloodworms there. Feels like moss, you said?
Yeah, it was very squishy.
Yeah, so just amazing to see these companies growing their own feeds, not just dependent on outside feed companies. And you can see those larval fish nibbling on those red bloodworm balls there in the middle. You can go to the next one.
Yeah. So, you know, with the feed, we also start thinking about diseases and, you know, the more manipulation and intensification of different systems. But just wanted to note a few things that we saw that were kind of cool. One was this leaf called Ketapeng. It's grown right outside the farm. Here it is alive, but they take the leaves and they dry the plants out. And they take those leaves individually and put one in each aquaria. And the idea is that this is a traditional method used to balance the pH in the water, which was really unique. And you saw it kind of all over the place whenever there were aquariums. So it was really well-known technique. That was cool to see. Other things, when fish had diseases, they typically wrote velvet on, so they knew that to be extra careful with those fish. Iodine blue was one of the more common treatments for these aquarium fish. And then, you know, in terms of water quality, these places that were typically, I want to say a lot of them were urban agriculture, use city water, but once they pumped it into these really, really large holding tanks right here shown in the middle, they only used physical filtration, no biofiltration of any kind, but they would do manual water exchanges with their aquaria every twice a week, about 80% of their aquaria, and just constantly do it that way. And then the water would refilter here in the holding tank. So yeah, I could say that would be a tough job too.
A lot of amazing entrepreneurial spirit, ingenuity, and hard work. So speaking of hard work, here's a family that really exemplifies the ornamental industry. And a real quick aside, how many of you have been into a pet store to buy freshwater fish? Probably a lot of you have. And have you ever thought about where that comes from? I'm always nervous and thinking, I hope this wasn't harvested from the Amazon rainforest and depleting the wild population. I'm assuming they're all wild caught. What we realized on this trip is that most freshwater ornamental fish are grown in aquaculture facilities like Jasmine Aquatic. This family has had a business for about 3 years. The guy in the yellow shirt there is the owner, and the girl in the little pink is Jasmine, who the business is named after, born right around the time the business was started. And Jasmine Aquatics grows ornamental fish. So we were greeted with a wonderful little snack and then got to see their facility. Next slide. This facility is primarily has a bunch of aquariums. And so their aquariums are just glass aquariums like Epigorian Aquatics, and they grow all sorts of incredible ornamental fish there. They have to keep these really clean and high quality, but you can see snakeheads that I'm making faces at there. And up at the top, you can see arowana down at the bottom left, a beautiful tropical fish found in Indonesia and in other parts of the world, growing just beautiful, beautiful fish. Piranha in the middle there. And then on the right, some zebrafish, or I call them that, all sorts of species. I think there was close to a dozen species at this facility. Really amazing, but growing mostly indoors. However, they do have multiple ways of growing. If you click the next slide, they've got their glass tanks and their concrete indoor tanks, and they do grow both silver and Asian. They have both colors, but the other way they grow them is out in ponds, in net pens. You can see this drone footage of this pond at their facility, and this is actually a number of farms grow in this pond. This is a closed off pond, maybe man-made, I can't recall, but a lot of these ponds are man-made ponds that are then filled with net pens that have a bunch of different types of fish, knifefish, and goldfish, and koi. And you can see those pens there at that end. Those are actually Jasmine Aquatics pens, the ones on the farthest end there. They're using, tire rafts and bamboos to get around, but it does the job for them. You can grow a lot of aquatic ornamental fish that way. You can hit the next slide. And, you know, so just a really cool way to see this family who really changed their life around and were self-learned, self-taught, using kind of family resources to get enough capital to get it off the ground. But now they have this burgeoning ornamental fish farm, which is amazing. And marine fish are also grown in some of these places, not just freshwater. Marine fish are more commonly wild harvested for ornamental trade, but here you can see a tank full of blue tang that were a foot long. This is at the Ministry of Aquaculture's research facility. They're trying to research ways to grow these high demand fish that are being depleted from wild systems because of movies like Finding Nemo. A lot of people want a dory or a blue tang, which is the blue ones. But again, we don't normally see them a foot long, and they're trying to get broodstock going. And then also the Nemos down there, grown in the net pens. You can see up at the top there, a fun experience trying to carry a $10,000 camera across those net pens. But
floating cages, Elliot.
oh yeah, sorry, floating cages. Yes, I knew I'd screw it up. I'm glad it works. This is how we support each other. So yeah, marine ornamentals as well. But you can go to the next one.
Awesome. And so part of being immersed in the ornamentals, we were welcomed to watch and learn a local lecturer in Bogorian Aquatics specifically to the breeding process with their aquaria fish, which was really really interesting and cool, and kind of similar to how we might breed fish species here. But they take out basically one species every weekend and induce spawning. And so they take the females and the males, and they use a little syringe, which they dispose of in water bottles. But they take a little bit of the hormone to induce the females and the males, and they wait 24 hours, and we were able to come back the next day and watch them strip the eggs and the sperm. And so the eggs, it's basically, I think 3 males to about 1 female with how many eggs a female lays. The male sperm is not viable if exposed to air longer than 3 seconds. So they use a sodium chloride solution that's syringed right on top of the fish, and that keeps the sperm viable until they mix it. Here is a video showing that them mixing the sperm with the eggs, and then they spray some water onto the sperm plate to wash all the sperm off, but the water also activates the sperm. And then they mix it very gently and use we asked them, what do they use? And they said a duck or a goose or whatever feather they could find. Here they think they used a chicken feather, and that's just really gentle and soft as to not break the egg sac. And so that there's the chicken feather there. And so nice and gentle, and just keep repeating after they go through all their brood stock. If I can, there we go. And so once they mix it together, then they take the plate, which, being really small fish, they take a plate and they put it directly into the aquaria, which was pretty cool to see. He's dropping the eggs the fertilized eggs now into the aquaria. You could see the eggs dropping to the bottom, and then they use the feather to kind of make sure it's all off the plate and into the aquarium. And that's when they start with the live feeds that Elliot kind of mentioned, once they eat the egg sac. And so, I also work with commercial fishermen and seafood processors and all different kinds of fisheries here in Michigan. So it's really unique to see the shared waters with commercial fishing and recreational fishing side and side with aquaculture. And so here on the left, you can see a recreational fisherman just wading along and going fishing. And this bottom is a fishing hut that you could rent out, that's offshore, that you can go and spend the night and go fishing on. This right here is a lift net. for commercial fishing that's used for night fishing. And so they drop the net down, they use a light to attract fish and then lift the net up. But we found that you can't do that during a full moon. The fish, it doesn't work. So that they're very in tune with how the environment is. Other commercial fishing that we noticed, one, we were eating and right out the window here, we're using fight nets, trying to catch, you know, just right there in the channel. And then this commercial fishing boat right here, it's really bright and colorful. We saw a lot of bright and colorful boats, but then we were informed that, you know, he's stationed here right at the market, and the idea is to bring consumers to purchase your food. So you want to be as noticeable as possible if you want people to come buy your product. And so that is why everything was very brightly colored.
Yeah, so we got to see some incredible processes for growing fish and for food and for ornaments. And of course, then we wanted to see the end. So we were fortunate enough to get to visit some markets. Let me tell you, a traditional ornamental fish market is something I will never forget. It was an incredible experience. In Bogor, we got to go to the largest traditional ornamental fish market in all of Indonesia. And it was over 300 vendors in probably like a maybe slightly smaller than a football field size area, packed with bags of fish. So many bags of fish. In these bags, they pump pure oxygen. They can keep the fish healthy for 48 hours. Every kind of betta fish imaginable, tetras and goldfish and koi and things that barramundi was in there. We weren't sure if that was food or ornamental, but just about every darn kind of fish in the world. It was incredible. It was an amazing experience to see this traditional fish market, which, you know, is where a lot of their fish go, but they don't just have traditional markets. There are also, yeah, you can see down there, the shipping fish in a scooter, which is the main mode of transport there. Bags of fish on the sides of a scooter, sometimes double stacked high. We're driving out of there. Really, really impressive scooter skills. But not all markets were kind of the traditional vendor style. There was also more traditional pet stores. Although even this pet store had actually individual vendor stalls for real high quality products. Somebody asked about what type of arowana. Here you can see the Asian or golden arowana up at the top. This was probably a multi-$100 fish right there for US dollars. Incredible. Down at the bottom, a mix of snakehead and catfish. Again, $100+ fish in some of these facilities that take a long time to grow out, but really amazing, the diversity. And a lot of these fish, though, actually end up in overseas markets. And so a majority of our producers we talked to actually had a lot more international shipping than domestic sales, but both are there. You can click the next. Oh yeah, that koi system there, Lauren's showing a little cool recirculating, home-built recirculating aquaculture system to keep those koi alive. So really, again, tons of innovative work there. You can hit the next one now, sorry. So some of the other markets we got to go to, not just ornamental, but food. So one of the markets that was fairly new was a traditional fish market in the north end of Jakarta. It was about a football field size area with hundreds of vendors that had just brought their fish in, right? So we got there around 5 or 6. This is the beginning of the market night where all the fishing days work is being chucked all over the place. So you've got fish thrown into buckets, being sorted and put into ice. And then it's time to start haggling. If you could click the next slide. So once once they get all the fish sorted, things really get going around 7 o'clock there, when the most amazing plethora of wild marine and some aquaculture and freshwater fish are on display. You can see a pile of, is it gold tilapia up there? You've got some incredible stingrays at the top there, a pile of snakeheads down on the bottom left there. Incredibly bright parrotfish on the right with a huge giant crab claws. I mean, the amount of diversity, prawns, crabs, multiple times of razor clams, whitefish maybe? I don't know what those are, but they sure look like whitefish. All sorts of incredible fish. Probably in this one space in one night, we saw what might be the total year harvest from Lake Superior in one place in one night. It was just an incredible display of fisheries. And so, yeah, lots of markets like that. You can click the next one. But they weren't all traditional markets where you haggle and you do your thing, which was a little challenging when you don't speak Indonesia, but we did do a little haggling and gets us try some. There's also traditional supermarkets. The economic levels in Indonesia span everything from the ultra wealthy to the ultra poor. And so some markets are just like a classic grocery store. But again, you're going to see way more diversity there than in our US stores. Things you would not find in a US store, like a tank of live fish or a whole section for salmon heads are a valuable product there. So some really, really amazing diversity in the grocery stores even too. You can hit the next slide. Oh, that's,
Yeah.
that hands it over to Lauren.
No, that's fine. No, it's super exciting. And I don't think I've been in one spot and seen so many fish in my life. Like it was crazy. But you know, with that, all that food fish, specifically, there's a lot of processing too, which I train seafood HACCP, which is FDA seafood safety, and it makes me a little jittery when we walked into a few places. But just specifically, it was really interesting to watch what they do. Typically, a big bottleneck is cold storage, and you think in Indonesia where it's like 90 degrees every single day, cold storage on ice, they bring in tarped ice into blocks to kind of keep the market cold and the fish cold, and they pay about $1 for one of those blocks of ice, put it through this machine here, and out comes crushed ice. And they use that crushed ice in the tubs with the fish to keep it fresh. We've also seen them add salt to that ice to kind of keep the freezing temperature lower as well. But that was in the modern market. We were in a more rural market in Sorong, and this market, the ice shanty or shed, was located right here. And you can see this lady pulling out her own ice to keep her fish cold. We saw lots of things like fish balls and drying fish on the side of the road or on top of your roof. That was common. And then I guess one story I'd like to share is this whole idea of formalin, as you can see labeled here. We were in that rural fish market, and there were flies on the fish, and they were saying, "Oh, they're fresh fish. Flies are good. Flies are good." And I was like, "Oh, why are flies good?" And they said, "Because they're not soaked in formalin." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Well, to keep a shelf life for the fish, they can douse them in a certain concentration of formalin." And so the idea that there's flies being around the fish means that there's no formalin. So it's one or the other, I guess. Other processing, seeing it either on the floor, more commonly in the legal way would be on top of the tubs. This was kind of interesting to see in person, but really brought together in terms of you know, you could buy those fish right from the market, and the location of the restaurant and where you could cook it or eat it, it was right next door. They were neighbors, right? So this top left picture shows that indoor really big food market, modern food market, and you just walk out with your purchase like we did and went upstairs. You come into a whole bunch of vendors trying to get your sale, and you pick someone based off of pictures on a menu, because nobody can speak the same language, maybe very little. And so you eat, we enjoyed a variety of different meals up there, Elliot, with the claw. Other ones was that more rural market. Here's a lady, she's processing squid right from the market. You turn around, she's there on a table processing the squid, and goes right onto a rack, which goes right onto the barbecue. And then you walk across the street after you put in your order 30 minutes later, and you have a feast at the restaurant. And of course, I think one of my favorite meals was here at the floating restaurant. So this floating restaurant had cages as part of like holding cages. So you could harvest your fish, dump them into the restaurant. You get to pick what you want, whether it's that crab or that specific fish, and then you eat it. So that was a really cool experience too. But you know, we got to talk about food. So one of my favorite foods was the sweet and sour gourami, and you can see it has a whole fish. And lots of interesting things. This is a banana wrapped rice. It's cooked that way to be a sweet rice. Another favorite was fried banana. That was like a dessert. You could put caramel sauce on top of that, and that was a great dessert, or just a nice little appetizer. Barbecue was totally a way to go. Butterflied fish, butterfly them and barbecued. They did have Starbucks, and I got to tell you, coffee was a challenge if you liked Americano, Elliot. But I liked my sweet and candy coffee, so I was pretty happy. The type of fruit juices, drinks were amazing. The lobster was probably one of my all-time favorites. And the weirdest thing that I ate that I was surprised I liked were these aquatic snails. And I do not like clams. I do not like oysters because they have this gummy texture. But these aquatic snails were really soft and tender, kind of like you're eating a fresh fish. And so that was a big surprise and really unique on how to pull those out of there. Oh, how about you, Elliot?
Yeah, I mean, the food in Indonesia was absolutely amazing. As Lauren said, they really love their sweet. And so fruit was really common. All the pictures on the right there are different kinds of fruit drinks or pieces of fruit. Coconut and fresh orange at the top, but on the bottom left is a drink with a spoon. At one point, I was probably a little hangry, and our guests were like, let's go get something to eat. And I got to sample this amazing dish of milk and all sorts of avocado and they think avocado is a fruit there more than a veggie. That's how they treat it. And then fermented cassava, really interesting, unique dish. Not Lauren's favorite. It was good though. On the left, everything, if it wasn't sweet or if it was sweet, it was also normally very spicy. So on the middle there, you can see the fish soup. Fish soups were just this amazing savory broth that just would heat up your throat with this wonderful spice. The smoked fish was incredible. Like Lauren said, the karang, the aquatic snails, were just one of the most flavorful things, just cooked in their own broth. That's it. And just the most tender things. And then, of course, the mantis shrimp, something that I'll probably never get to try again. Felt a little guilty eating it, but it was probably the most tasty crustacean I've ever put in my mouth. So incredible food there, really spicy, really sweet. Lauren is not a huge fan of spicy, but we made it work.
Nope, I'd walk around saying tidak pedas, which means no spice, no spice. And then if anything, I had Elliot taste test it first. So it worked.
My heat tolerance went up about 3 notches. I've already emptied like 2 of my hottest hot sauces since I got home. All right, we should probably keep moving along here.
Yeah.
Food was amazing.
So, food was great, but kind of coming back to, we had all these awesome experiences, and something that we brought along with us was this 360 virtual reality camera. And this is a 6-lens camera that provides a fully immersive experience to a place that might not be readily available, or I mean, I can't imagine taking all of MSU to Indonesia maybe in person, but I can bring them here with the 360 camera. And so this camera was actually from a previous MSU grant, the Creating Inclusive Excellence grant. And so we brought this with us to extend and increase our aquaculture curriculum capacity. And so we took this with our tours and are able to bring it back and make it part of a curriculum. And it was fun trying to bring it onto floating cages. And so we did a lot of new things with the camera, but we also partnered pretty closely with an unexpected partner when we were there. They're called Telkom. It was like the AT&T of Indonesia. They followed along with us. They have a research and development side for their workforce development, and wanted to follow us and see what we did with our 360 technology. And that was kind of interesting and a cool unexpected collaboration. And so I really want to give a teaser as to what is a 360 a video or camera look like. And so I'm going to share a 360 video on a floating cage in Lombok with those blue tangs. And so let's let's see. Coming through clear, Elliot? Awesome. And so, you know, it looks like we're right here. This would be a 2D, but I could take the screen and scan, and we could see the blue tanks here. They're being fed. Or I can take a look around and see the rest of the floating cages. We could see Elliot holding onto the really expensive camera so it doesn't fall in. Somebody else is feeding fish in the background. I'm controlling the camera with my iPad, and we can look all the way around. And so the idea is that this can be done on a computer, your phone, or a VR headset, and provide this really immersive experience similar to place-based education, but in an opportunity where it might not be feasible.
Yeah, so we're really hoping, you know, from this experience, not to just have built cross-cultural relationships and maybe future partnerships, not just have to learn about a lot of aquaculture, but to really produce some 360 curriculum that'll be useful. One of the things we did was a training for the students in Jakarta at the campus. You can see in the top middle picture there, the hand over the mouth, the incredible experience of using an Oculus if you haven't before. Research shows that 360 learning experiences can be a lot more powerful than a 2D video experience and really impart strong learning. And one of the things that with these campuses, they're hours apart. You know, we were driving 2 to 4 hours a day to get to these locations. These students don't have the financial resources to travel like that and experience all their other campuses and the types of systems. So these kind of 360 videos will actually allow them to be on other campuses and learn about other types of systems than just what's at their own campus, hopefully into the future. And that was something that Telecom's working on too, and part of that partnership. You can go to the next slide. We're running a little short on time here, but we'll try to wrap up. So, you know, some of our lessons learned. This was kind of one of the main lessons that I learned a long time ago from a group called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. This is a really powerful model for cross-cultural learning. It's inevitable when you go into a cross-cultural experience that you're going to feel dissonance, that you're going to see things that aren't the way you're used to. And that's going to bring out feelings of misunderstanding, frustration, confusion. That's inevitable whenever you have a cross-cultural learning experience. But how you approach that experience and how you respond to those inevitables is really important. And it's kind of, we call it green lining at the top, where you're sort of open, accepting, and then you kind of follow up with an inquisitive nature. And deepen relationships, or you can green line or red line, where you're kind of fearful and sort of isolating and pushing back. And if you click the picture there, we definitely tried to green line as much as we could, you know, in a very different place. And it was not hard with the people there, who were absolutely incredible, very forgiving when we would mess something up. But, you know, by day 10, 12, 14, 18, we're redlining sometimes too. And so, you know, you can see by day 12, I was ordering a pizza. I'm a foodie. I loved Indonesian food, but I needed that comfort. Lauren's face there. They had some sort of weird fish paste inside of banana leaves. Yeah, so, you know, you got to check yourself when you're redlining and greenlining, but you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, so it's redlining, greenlining, Elliot. It was great. You know, we really needed a teammate. We needed to keep each other in check, not only, you know, handling and facilitating the technology, but also the language and understanding and the food, or you know, letting Elliot fall in with the really expensive camera rather than yourself. But yeah,
or having Lauren say, Elliot, I think you're hungry. We probably need to get you a snack. Or me say, Lauren, I think you're dehydrated. You need to set the camera down and drink some water. You know.
But this was, you know, I definitely would only want to do this with a teammate, and it was very rewarding for that. That we would be remiss if we did not mention pollution. It was very evident everywhere. There was no system, or there was a system. People would just rather take the empty lot that was free to toss out trash. And so it's kind of everywhere, the amount of smog. You could smell the city when you were coming into the city. And so that was something that we were very conscious of once we were there and learning.
Yeah, so again, lots of cultural differences there. You know, at one point I went to use the wrong religious sink instead of the normal sink, or the traffic was really, really crazy. But also those cultural differences helped us have such a more rich and deep experience learning not only about different types of systems, but a whole different perspective on the world, which is really important. You can go to the next slide, which kind of leads into, at the end, it was really important for us to make sure we were taking it all in, both in making sure we knew our own limits, when to take breaks, when to have that teammate, but also when to just sit back and appreciate the beauty and the amazingness that is this country, from an incredible, all sorts of incredible experiences. So it was really important in the end to make sure we took time to just be and to just immerse ourselves in that culture.
Awesome. And we know this was a lot to cram into 1 hour. So thank you for bearing with us with all these photos. And, really a big thank you to you, Elliot, for joining me on this adventure and the program, but also, a big thank you to Kareem in the Global Scholars Program for being able to allow us this partnership development, as well as all our partners that we encountered, because the people really, really made it what a great experience it was. So, between everybody listed here, but especially Dr. Rami, who we were working with in partnership and setting this incredible experience up. So with that, thank you all for attending. We're happy to stay on a little bit for questions and answers. This presentation is recorded. So, if we went through a little something too fast, we're happy to talk more, but this is a great overall gist of what we wanted to share with so many of you. So thank you again. And if you need to leave, I hope you have a great and maybe hopefully not snowy Monday. Elliot, anything else that I might have missed or you want to add?
No, thank you for kind of hearing a little bit about our experience. And we're hoping, that this is not the end. This is just the beginning of a new partnership with MSU and Indonesian partners. And we're really looking forward to see how it continues to develop. With that, we've got some questions in the chat, a few here and there. And again, if you can stay on and you want to ask questions, we'll stay on with you. You can type your questions into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you. So down at the bottom is an option to raise your hand and we can unmute you. But yeah, anyone that attended, we will email the recording. Anyone that registered will email the recording out. One of the questions earlier came from Titus, a colleague of ours from Wisconsin, and he was asking about the split there between recreational, commercial, and aquaculture. Here in the U.S., we have very little aquaculture. In the Great Lakes, we have a thriving commercial industry, but it's a small number of players, but a high amount of product across the region. And then recreational is kind of dominant. Their recreational is barely tracked from what we could understand. It's definitely a part of their culture, but it's not the dominant fishery there, right? Commercial fishing and aquaculture play a much bigger role in their aquatic spaces than recreational fish do compared to the Great Lakes, I would say.
I would like to add, Elliot, a lot of that is also the value that you hold on it, right? So if you look at fish in other countries, the number one value is fish as food. If you look at internal at US and the history of aquaculture, it's really fish as the natural resource. And so that fish as food, whether in Indonesia, you did not need a permit to grow your own fish or to go recreationally fishing, but a lot of it was subsistence fish. So it was in order to feed, what is it, 10 million people inside the city of Jakarta, with the outskirts being 34 million people. Food kind of becomes more of the predominant. However, the Blue Economy Conference was about shifting towards this idea of sustainability and setting quota systems and kind of being cognizant of that food as a resource. So recreational fishing in other countries is thought of as a very luxurious sport.
Yeah, somebody asked about the blue tang and the clownfish. So they're trying, they don't let those blue tang go. They're trying to grow what we call broodstock, which is captive fish that you keep for their eggs and sperm to be able to grow more fish. They haven't fully developed that for the blue tang yet, so they're sort of just in holding. The clownfish, I think they'd had more success. There were anemones in there. And I think that's a known thing how to do. So they were breeding both of those. They don't let them go. The lobster, somebody asked what kind of lobster. Pearl lobster are the expensive lobster. It take a couple years. It can be upwards past $50 wholesale US. Sand lobster take a little less time, 6 to 12 months to grow out in the cage culture. And so that was the other one. Those are the two they grow. There are, I think, at least 3 other types of spiny lobster that can be wild caught but aren't produced because they don't grow as big, I think, is the main thing. And then somebody asked what kind of shrimp do they grow with the mangroves? Lauren, you want to take that one?
White leg shrimp.
Okay, oh, that was easy. Yeah, white leg shrimp's the dominant kind of shrimp grown.
Depends on the decade and what disease is attacking next, but right now it's white leg shrimp.
Other questions? Feel free to raise your hand or type them in the chat. I'm trying to look through to see what other questions we might have missed from earlier.
Hey, Elliot, there was a question from early on about mangroves and coastal flooding, and wondering if the reduction of mangroves changes coastal flooding.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on mangroves, but my understanding is they definitely act as a buffer between land and water, right? In the same way that our Great Lakes coastal wetlands can help regulate flooding, so can mangroves. They're definitely part of preventing storm surges from really causing lots of damage with extreme high tides and things like that. So yes, they're part of a natural buffer between land, and in the reverse, they also capture nutrients coming off the land before they end up in the water, particularly when there's excess nutrients that might cause an algal bloom and problems. The mangroves can help absorb some of those excess nutrients so they don't cause as many problems in the reefs that are often right off of them.
Yes, Todd, we ate fish every day, and I want to say I ate something different I've never had before in my life every day. So it was a great experience that we're happy to share, and we want to thank all of you for attending and letting us share today.
Yeah, thank you everyone for spending some time with us.